1 year ago, Zack Snyder's Justice League, also known as the Snyder Cut, was released on HBO Max. After years of DC fans constantly yelling, "Release the Snyder Cut," which was the infamous and well-known phrase surrounding this movement, the people were finally given what they wanted. And with the Snyder Cut finally turning 1 year old, I figured this would be the perfect time to finally review Zack Snyder's Justice League. Before I dive into the review, we're going to be doing something a little different. Rather than reviewing this movie in the same style of my other videos, we'll be reviewing each act and then bringing my thoughts together to review Zack Snyder's Justice League. I mean, let's be real, it's only fitting to review this movie exactly how it's designed for a viewing experience. With that being said, let's dive into the Snyder Cut, starting with part 1, Don't Count on It, Batman.
Bruce Wayne.
Part 1, Don't Count on It, Batman, is good for the most part. While I was watching this part, I've grown to realize that most of my problems with it are minor criticisms and less so these massive flaws that I find to be straight up awful. For instance, even a year later, I still don't like the ancient lamentation that is used in the first part of this movie. I find it to be both obnoxious and genuinely unneeded. I say this despite understanding the core reasoning behind the use of the lamentation, to emphasize that our main cast of heroes are essentially viewed as gods. However, in a scene like Wonder Woman's entrance, the ancient lamentation isn't needed at all. It's a moment that, for the most part, I love more than anything in Wonder Woman 1984. Yeah, I know, it isn't saying much, but still, that's a big deal if you ask me. It's just that the ancient lamentation kind of throws the scene off because all we really need is Wonder Woman's theme throughout that scene because it fucking slaps and it's something we all immediately identify Wonder Woman with. It's a theme that when you hear it, you think of Wonder Woman, whether it's the movie or the character specifically. That theme immediately makes you think Wonder Woman. If you just let that theme build up throughout the entirety of that scene and have Wonder Woman's entrance begin with the most known part of her theme song, the super well done guitar riff, it works so much better in that context because that moment is about Wonder Woman. We all know that Diana Prince is basically a goddess. We all know that people view her in the same light as Superman in the Snyderverse. And because of that, we don't need lamentations to emphasize that. Despite that criticism, I still legitimately like that scene a lot. I think it's pretty fucking good, but it would be so much better if Wonder Woman's theme was the only song at that moment. Although I don't understand why Wonder Woman chose to slap her bracelets together when she could have just ran up to the leader of that terrorist group in literal milliseconds to save the day, but I digress. A scene like Lois Lane's first introduction doesn't entirely need a sad religious song specifically to emphasize that she misses Superman and to remind us that Superman is viewed as a god in the Snyderverse as well. That, just like the ancient lamentations, adds an extra layer of emphasis that is a bit much and almost ruins what are otherwise perfectly fine scenes for the most part. As a viewer, you understand the point that Zack Snyder is trying to get across with these creative decisions. You understand the religious symbolism or connections that he's attempting to draw for this movie and universe. It's just that he can still do that same thing on a smaller scale and it would still work out perfectly fine. Yes, the Lois Lane scene is fairly small, but the same impact, if not a bigger impact, could have been made with the choice of a different song. It's all about knowing how to balance these creative ideas so they stand out more positively and less of a, this could have been tuned down a bit and it'd be much better type of manner. The same thing goes for the use of slow motion in the first part too. For the most part, the use of slow motion works more often than it doesn't, but there are moments where you're like, okay, this part of the scene doesn't need it. Why was it included for this? I don't need to see a character running away in slow motion if that scene cuts away to something entirely different, like a building falling down. However, in a scene that uses slow motion to emphasize the power of Steppenwolf, such as a character dodging a seemingly powerful attack that Steppenwolf does, works because it adds an extra layer of emotion to that scene. It makes you concerned about the character, it makes you hope that they'll live, and it gets you interested in that seemingly major moment. As I said, these criticisms or nitpicks aren't that big of a deal, but if you were to make these changes, it makes these moments in Zack Snyder's Justice League far more enjoyable. As for things I really liked about this part of the movie, man, I'll just say it, Ben Affleck was so good as Bruce Wayne. It's been a while since I've watched a movie with him in this role, but the way he carries himself as he goes on his journey to find Aquaman is great. The way his iteration of Bruce Wayne handles getting mocked by the people of Iceland is exactly how you'd expect Bruce Wayne to handle it, saying absolutely nothing despite perfectly understanding Iceland's language. The way this Bruce Wayne deals with Aquaman picking him up and being perfectly calm about it, only for him to just hand over a bunch of money, like it's nothing by the way, is also great. And sure, it's just a small dose of the Snyderverse's Bruce Wayne in this part of the movie, but it reminded me how good Ben Affleck was. Even the way he handles Aquaman's banter about him dressing up as a bat, which he calmly responds with, "Worked for 20 years in Gotham," is hilarious despite it being delivered incredibly seriously. Along with this scene and Wonder Woman scene, I also genuinely like Steppenwolf's scene. Despite the overuse of the ancient lamentation in it, Steppenwolf genuinely feels like a force of evil. He has the oh shit factor and looks to part 2. Despite having a bit too much slow motion in it, I loved how most of it was incredibly impactful as Steppenwolf mauled the Amazons. It added to the emotional stakes, it gave Steppenwolf that key villain factor that's needed to make him feel impossible at first, and I really like the action throughout all of this. Together, all of these moments work in the first part of this movie and kind of remind you how, despite there being flaws in Zack Snyder's creative decision making or creative thinking, he still knows how to put together very likable moments that will keep you wanting to watch the rest of the movie. Part 2, The Age of Heroes, is honestly a lot stronger than I remembered. However, I think this chapter as a whole relies on the viewer's interest. The whole point of part 2 is to build out this movie's premise and lay down the groundwork needed for this movie's story. There's a lot of backstory and bits or pieces of information that are told throughout this chapter, and if you're not already interested in finding out this information, this chapter isn't for you. It's made for the viewer that cares and wants to learn the small, intricate details to be fully invested in Zack Snyder's Justice League, which is perfectly fine. For me, I still cared enough about literally every single one of those things, so I thoroughly enjoyed this chapter. Sure, there are more of the incredibly annoying ancient lamentations that I hated in the first part of this movie, but for the most part, there isn't much here for me to complain about beyond one obvious thing: the lack of Cyborg in the Flash. However, that doesn't necessarily matter considering this movie does such a fairly decent job at teasing their roles in this movie. There are throwaway lines like "the disappearing man," referring to the Flash when Bruce asks Alfred if they have any new footage of Barry, or Cyborg finally getting some screen time, which alludes to Cyborg's major role later on. And because of this, along with the fact that there's still 3 hours left by the time you finish part 2, it doesn't feel like you're getting robbed of these characters under screen time. The strongest portion in this part of the movie, however, is the way it handles telling the story of Darkseid and his intentions by far. I love how this movie builds up to Diana finding out the truth about Darkseid and finding out why the beacon was lit up. Her facial expression increasingly grows with a ton of concern, and there's so much tension in that scene as different portions of the wall are lit up by her torch. As she gets closer and finally lights up the art that shows Darkseid, I couldn't help but smile because of Diana's intense concern for the fate of the world. Not only that, I love how the movie goes from showing us this to Diana deciding to speak to Bruce, which immediately gives us even more backstory about Darkseid, which should be boring, but it's not. As Diana tells us more about Darkseid and how he originally failed to take over Earth because the humans, Lanterns, Amazons, and Atlanteans all defended Earth together as one, it only got more interesting. The action scenes were great since everybody got to shine in their own way. Darkseid felt legitimately threatening and scary. The story itself was interesting because seeing everybody unite for the first time ever after years of knowing that they shouldn't ever unite as one was satisfying. Together as one, they took down Darkseid and equally shined through different portions of that fight. It's by far the best portion of Part 2, The Age of Heroes, and it's not even close despite me loving another thing about this chapter of the movie. I love the idea of trying to almost humanize Steppenwolf because it gives so much more depth as a villain. The idea that Steppenwolf isn't necessarily choosing to destroy Earth on purpose, despite putting on that front when he invades the Amazons, is really intriguing, and it's because of what we learn through Decide. Steppenwolf isn't necessarily doing this because he wants to, he's doing it because he wants acceptance from Darkseid, who is his own family, after making some sort of mistake that is seemingly massive. And while that might sound corny, it makes Steppenwolf far more interesting and makes him feel like more than just a generic CGI villain. There's a personality there, there's an actual angle that he's trying to reach for a legitimately good reason, and most importantly, it makes you want to find out more about Darkseid and Steppenwolf's dynamic. As for other things I liked in this part of the movie, despite us only getting a small glimpse of it, I love how this movie showcases Bruce and Alfred's dynamic. The fact that Alfred isn't afraid to make fun of Bruce or give him some sort of clapback when Bruce says something dumb is hilarious. It's something that the other Batman movies don't really have, which, shameless plug, if you haven't yet, you should check out my overly long playlist containing every single Batman movie being reviewed. Now, I didn't expect to like this still, but I also still somewhat like how this movie emphasizes the complexity of Aquaman's relationship with the Atlanteans, despite knowing that he mended that relationship in Aquaman. Sure, it feels a bit dramatic, especially since we know the outcome of Aquaman, but I somewhat enjoy seeing Aquaman struggle between wanting to do good and not wanting to help the Atlanteans due to his past. Again, what this portion of the movie comes down to is whether or not you care about the backstory that lays the groundwork for this movie. If you don't care about Steppenwolf's intentions, Darkseid's role in the movie, or the backstory regarding the mother boxes, you probably don't like or wouldn't like this part of the movie. If I really had to give any criticisms though, beyond my dislike for the Ancient Lamentations, I'd have to say I didn't really need that speech before the Arrow of Artemis was shot. And it's primarily because part 1 did such a great job at building to that moment. That final conversation in part 1 that ends with the line, "Men won't know what it means, but she will," was good enough to hype us up for that moment since we know who she is referring to. All that moment needed was Wonder Woman's theme slowly building up as the arrows being shot, and it would have been much better rather than having a whole speech telling us about the meaning of the Arrow of Artemis. Like, let's be realistic. Most of us don't care that much about the exact backstory of the arrow. We just want it to get shot so we can see Diana's reaction. Again, it's a nitpick and I fully recognize that, but sometimes less is more. Part 3, Beloved Mother, Beloved Son, starts off pretty rough, I'd say. It's not because of something that is overly terrible, it's due to the fact that the introduction of Barry Allen could have been so much better. The problem is how this movie handles introducing Barry, which is primarily the Speed Force portion where he's saving Iris. Firstly, we don't need Barry to do something quirky or weird when he's saving Iris. We know he's a dork, we know he's quirky, we know he's an unintentionally funny character, and this scene where he touches her hair or grabs a hot dog in the Speed Force overdoes it for me. It's like, we get it, we don't need this in the scene at all. Just let Barry be a hero, let him breathe without having to forcefully remind us that he's quirky. Like, we know, it's Barry Allen. Plus, we just got a scene before the Speed Force scene that showed off his quirkiness. Just let Barry be a hero even though he's just learning how to be one at this portion of his career. Also, the song choice for this scene was not good at all. It could have been so much better if they chose to do their own rendition of a song that's similar to the Flash's theme song on the CW.
Now run, Barry, run!
You see, a moment like that in the first season of The Flash works. The emotional speech, the theme song intensifying, and then being able to see Barry become a superhero all work together. And in this movie, despite there not being an emotional speech, a super cool theme song with Barry immediately realizing that he needs to be a hero would have worked so much better. It would have been far more interesting, it would have been far more impactful, and it would have really let the scene become something incredibly memorable for a more positive reason. With that being said, I absolutely love how this entire section of the movie is pretty much dedicated to Cyborg and Barry. They both shine in their own ways. We get to understand Barry Allen as a person, and he shines thoroughly in every scene he's in. There's just something about Ezra Miller in this role where they steal the scenes time and time again. Whether it's when Barry and his dad are talking on the phone, Barry is being confronted by Bruce, or Barry is freaking out over the bat signal, Ezra Miller is sort of the star in these moments. Meanwhile, we get the counterbalance of seeing a far more emotional storyline with Cyborg. Cyborg has this incredibly sad storyline, and you begin to understand his frustrations with the world, which is primarily because of what his father did to him. Despite him being mad at the world, the only person who even gets through to him is Wonder Woman. The way Diana talks to him and shows her humility through her ability to talk to Cyborg is beautiful. Their conversation with each other is what I wanted to see more of in Wonder Woman 1984, but unfortunately that didn't happen. I just love how, despite Cyborg being defensive during this conversation, you can see that Diana's words still impacted him positively, whether he wanted that to be the case or not. Also, I have to give credit for this, but despite me liking the first two parts of Zack Snyder's Justice League, this is the first part where I felt like Zack Snyder's ability to throw together scenes with massive amounts of CGI shines. When Cyborg is listening to his father's recording, there are breathtaking visuals, and it is incredibly absurd how even a year later, this scene is still amazing and still made me think, holy shit, like the CGI throughout part 3 is absurd. The same thing goes for the introduction to Barry when he uses the Speed Force and his finger goes through the glass, causing it to shatter in slow motion. And I know that I've been hard on the slow motion in this movie, but the first time where a long duration of slow motion has paid off is during this part of the movie, and that's the football scene. The football scene in its entirety is so fucking well done. I love that the slow motion for this scene builds up the viewer's emotional investment and intensity of the football game together. There are 5 seconds on the clock, one last play left, and everybody's on their feet watching this final play by Victor, hoping for the victory. And the use of slow motion builds that up amazingly, and I love how it immediately ends as Victor scores the touchdown. It's fucking great, and it's the first time that I was glad that there was so much slow motion in it. These moments are fucking amazing, and it reminds you how much love and care was put into this movie. Whether you like it or not, you can't deny the fact that Zack Snyder's Justice League has a long list of amazing CGI or visual effects scenes. It's just that, for me, this is where that love and care really begins to shine. Another moment that I really enjoyed is so simple, but I love the small scene with Diana and Alfred. I love how Diana is clearly losing her patience, despite Alfred genuinely trying to help her make the best tea possible, but I specifically love that Alfred showed her Bruce's rip-off gauntlets. It's fucking hilarious. Her reaction of being shown that Bruce is copying her and her being like, maybe you should work on a lasso too, in an annoyed tone is fucking hilarious. In a movie like this, where actual emotional stakes and an intense storyline are being built, small moments like these are key. It gives the viewer a reason to laugh and kind of have a break from the stakes of this movie, and it genuinely lands. It's a simple yet well done scene that stands out and reminds you how good Gal Gadot is when it comes to bouncing off of other actors when she shares a scene with someone. Also, despite this being a brief scene, I love that even Aquaman got his time to shine as well. Steppenwolf comes into Atlantis to steal the mother box, and just when you think all hope is lost, here comes Aquaman, finally making his decision of being a hero. The previous chapter explicitly mentions that there's a new age of heroes that are going to save the day, and to have a follow-up section where the characters who have been getting the least amount of screen time previously finally getting the most screen time, along with everyone else still getting time to shine as well, genuinely works. The best part is the section ends giving you that feeling that the Justice League is starting to form. Okay, fine, I'll say it. They're starting to assemble. Are y'all happy now? Part 4, Change Machine, is where the fun in Zack Snyder's Justice League begins. Don't get me wrong, yes, I liked part 1 through 3, but this is where the most fun in this movie takes place. This chapter's intro is fucking amazing, with the shot of Batman in the sky with the stellar music and background lighting. The hype you get from seeing the Justice League together as they listen to Commissioner Gordon's details, the action sequences between the Justice League and Steppenwolf fighting each other, and the chapter ending with the Justice League preparing to bring back Superman, this is that good shit. Getting through 3 chapters of what is essentially set up immediately pays off with this chapter, because this is exactly what one wants out of a superhero movie. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't smile the entire time I was watching this section again. And the thing is, there really isn't much here story-wise to break down or spend time truly analyzing. It's pretty much a small section filled with constant action, and I'm pretty much okay with that. We've already gotten through 3 sections of setup, talking, and finding out details about the overall plot of this movie's antagonist. The last thing this section needed was, to begin with, even more talking, and the fact that the action is still stellar says a lot. Even non-action related bits like Wonder Woman replying back to Steppenwolf's command of saying she belongs to him with, "I don't belong to no one." Like, yeah, that single reply alone gives you chills and makes you want to cheer on Wonder Woman as she bravely takes on Steppenwolf in a one-on-one fight. Even small bits like Barry dodging every single attack from a parademon because he doesn't know how to fight yet due to him being inexperienced is funny in the best way possible. Hell, seeing him trip after bravely rushing to help Wonder Woman get her sword back as she falls landed with me still. Pun intended, of course. Finally, watching the Justice League collectively discuss important details about the mother boxes as the camera rotates is so well done. That rotating camera slowly spins as the conversation begins to really grow in intensity, adding to the atmosphere of this moment. And as the conversation begins to lead towards finally reviving Superman, I love that Ben Affleck's Bruce Wayne is adamant about reviving Superman. I love that final line before this part ends where Bruce says, "This is the only way. There are 6, not 5. There is no us without him." It's fucking great, and I love how it adds to Bruce's inner regret of fighting with Superman. I love how it showcases how adamant Bruce is about making things right, not only for his conscience, but for the sake of saving the world. Despite me liking the other chapters, this is the first chapter where I've loved it from start to finish without any real problems or genuine criticisms worth mentioning. If I had to give a complaint for this section, I'd say that the Martian Manhunter and Lois Lane scene didn't really do much for me at all. Like, I get it, she plays a role in Superman's life, so they need her to be ready when the Justice League eventually revives him, but like, Martian Manhunter should have been set up better, so this scene was more impactful. It felt more like Martian Manhunter being a plot device than Martian Manhunter's reveal being this oh shit type of moment for me. On top of that, since we spend little to no time at all with Martian Manhunter, his reveal is more so confusing than it is clear. He just appears, talks to Lois as Martha, reveals himself, and the audience is supposed to accept it? Honestly, it makes no sense contextually. Sure, it moves the plot along, but it's like, this moment could have been so much better if we were given some time with Martian Manhunter somehow. That way, we at least knew of him, even if it was without his powers. That way, that scene would answer the curiosity of, why the hell is this movie showing us this guy that we don't care about? That would make this Martian Manhunter reveal so much better. Once again though, this clearly suffers from the lack of world building since we never got the fully fleshed out universe that would have at least made this moment make far more sense and feel less out of place. Still though, Change Machine is far better than I remembered, and it is easily the beginning of where Zack Snyder's Justice League genuinely begins to get good. This is where your initial time and emotional investment begins to pay off. This is where you get to see more than just plot setup or important backstory that's needed for things to make sense in the long run. This is where you get to see this new age of heroes truly begin to form. Part 5, All the King's Horses is alright, but I felt like something was missing from this chapter of the Snyder Cut. I think my core problem with it is the fact that there's a distinct lack of Steppenwolf. I like the overall idea, which is to primarily spend the chapter focusing on reviving Superman and the struggle between the various Justice League members due to the morality surrounding this decision, and for the most part, it works. It truly does. However, I feel like it was missing something that could have truly upped the stakes of reviving Superman, and that's Steppenwolf. Although, the revival scene with Barry running towards the mother box to provide a charge so they can revive Superman is there, I feel like there was an opportunity there to remind the audience of why they're doing it. Like, yes, I know narratively that Steppenwolf can't know where they are due to the mother box not being located, but I would have loved something, whether it was a scene of Steppenwolf talking to someone like Darkseid or Desaad, Steppenwolf commanding the parademons, or Steppenwolf verbally talking about plans to attack another location on Earth. Inputting that reminder would have done so much more. It would have added an extra layer of depth to that revival. It would have reminded us like, oh fuck, Steppenwolf is still plotting while they're busy reviving Superman. And sure, he still makes his appearance after Superman is revived since he found out where the mother box was due to it being used. However, there still felt like a distinct lack of Steppenwolf in this chapter, which leaves a lot to be desired. With that being said, I still do like other aspects of this chapter. I like seeing Barry somehow manage to get someone like Aquaman, who has very little patience or tolerance, to deal with his quirky bullshit. I love the slow motion that's added to the scene of Barry running to touch the mother box. Of course, the hilarious slow motion scene of Superman turning towards Barry as he's running to him and Barry being absolutely confused is still amazing. Henry Cavill clearly steals the show and reminds you why so many people do love him as Superman. Even if I don't personally like Man of Steel, it's just that I couldn't help finding myself asking questions like, what the hell is Steppenwolf up to? What do you think Steppenwolf's parademons are doing? Or is there some other plan that's being worked on as we watch this? Or is Steppenwolf just hoping that they use the mother box and he can instantly come to take it away from them? It kind of took me out of this chapter, along with Gal Gadot's terrible delivery of her line, "Kal-El, no!" That was just abysmally done and needed far more emotional despair and concern than what she did in that take. That was straight up not good. And I guess I don't care that much about the whole Lois Lane conveniently wanting to go to Superman's memorial since she misses him, considering the only times we see Lois in this movie, which isn't much, are when she's missing Superman. It's super convenient plot-wise, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't necessarily feel out of character for her at that moment, so it is what it is.
Fly, son. It's time.
Yeah, part 6, Something Darker, fucking slaps. It is so good. It's so damn satisfying to see that this entire team, which is finally now working together, actually works as a team. We spend so much time building this Justice League, and when this chapter of the movie finally comes, you're rewarded with everything and more. Everyone shines. Batman shines as he uses his various gadgets, which we don't see often in other Batman movies. The Flash has his pinnacle moment, which is easily my favorite moment in a superhero movie ever, if not my second favorite moment, behind the Avengers assembling in Avengers Endgame. Wonder Woman gets multiple moments throughout this portion of the movie where she saves the day and helps other people out, which once again showcases her best trait, her humility. And of course, Aquaman gets the most Aquaman scene possible, which is happily lifting up Steppenwolf with his trident as Superman and Wonder Woman help finish him off with one last attack as a team. The entirety of this chapter is fucking amazing, and it's easily the best chapter of this movie, along with part 4 of Zack Snyder's Justice League. If anything, my only real complaint is that this section of the movie is so damn good that it kind of hurts, because it makes you wish that there were way more team dynamics in this movie action-wise. Yes, we get moments throughout the movie that make you laugh or put a smile on your face that aren't action-oriented, but when this team is fighting together, you can't help but want more. It's legitimately that good. You can't help but wish that you were able to see far more of this awesome Justice League team fighting side by side together, and that feeling sucks. However, I'm genuinely being serious. There really isn't much to complain about in this part of the Snyder Cut. Besides Batman's goggles, they look ridiculous. He didn't need them. I'm sorry. It's the truth.
A truce, Bruce.
So, I chose not to talk about the teaser for the epilogue that was shown when Cyborg was helping with the revival of Superman, just so I can talk about it in this section. It just made more sense to be able to talk about it in one section. Anyway, I think this epilogue did a great job at wrapping up Zack Snyder's Justice League. Everyone gets their good endings, and it leaves that chapter of this movie closed. However, I won't lie, I'm kind of hurt, or at least annoyed, by the rest of this epilogue. I almost wish there wasn't a teaser for Ben Affleck's Batman movie that never happened. I almost wish there wasn't a teaser for the future of this universe with the Nightmare Vision, even though I like seeing Batman and Joker banter back and forth. Don't get me wrong, Jared Leto's Joker leaves a lot to be desired, but in this scene, it's good enough. However, I would have preferred for Bruce to not tell Joker that he'd kill him, mostly because that's out of character for Batman. I almost wish there wasn't a conversation between Bruce and Martian Manhunter, despite Ben Affleck once again killing it in this scene. It's just that it sucks because we don't get to see what leads to this moment, and I say this despite hating the overused Superman going evil trope. Honestly, for once, that would make sense in this universe. It makes sense that Superman turns evil, likely because of Lois dying a horrible death, the mother box eventually corrupting him, or something to that extent. I guess it's just that I struggle to be happy about these extra scenes, considering we all know we'll never see it come into fruition. The movie could have ended with the happy endings for Aquaman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Superman, and Batman, and personally, I think that'd be perfect enough. The rest of it honestly wasn't needed, but I understand the idea of doing it because it leads to people calling for DC to restore the Snyderverse. So we did it. I finally got to the end of this video and the end of the script. Before I give my closing thoughts, if you somehow reached the ending of the video, I appreciate you. If you made it this far into the video, let's do something fun. Write in the comments below, IDontBeatGames needs to beat a game already. For people who don't make it to the end of this video, that will look so random and it'd be so funny to me if that was in my comment section as a small Easter egg for the people who spent their time watching this video. Anyway, yeah, so Zack Snyder's Justice League, where do I stand on this movie? Well, it's not perfect. There are a lot of creative decisions and ideas that don't land with me. I've repeated this a million times now, but I don't think the first half of this was paced well. I didn't like the ancient lamentations anytime it was used. There were a couple of scenes that felt weird, or several parts that felt like they could have done a few things better to really increase the quality of the overall movie. And I think the hard reality is that this movie as a 4-hour experience is good. It's a good time, but it takes about 2 hours for someone to really see that. And I could understand if someone tapped out 1 hour in or so, mainly because this movie has a lot of backstories and a lot of explanation in the beginning to make the overall movie make sense, which isn't a bad thing. However, we all know deep down inside that if this movie was a pinnacle movie where all these characters got multiple movies and they all had Easter eggs to tease this moment happening, along with Easter eggs through the buildup, this would have been a much better movie. It would have cut down on a lot of the filler content that was backstory related or explanation related. That alone would have trimmed this movie down by like a good 30 or so minutes, which would have done wonders for this movie. And if you removed a lot of the slow motion that wasn't necessarily needed at the beginning of the movie, that too would have trimmed down the runtime. If we're being real, I genuinely think there's a very good 3-hour or just under 3-hour long movie. Like, don't get me wrong, the movie is still good. It's not a terrible experience by any means. It's just that if you do a lot of the changes I've suggested, I do think this would have been a movie that on release, people would have been talking about heavily. This would have made a gigantic impact for DC and would have had people talking about theories and where they want to see the DCEU go. It would have gotten people actually invested into a Justice League 2, Justice League 3, or even potential team up between two characters like Wonder Woman and Aquaman for a movie. And I think that's a simple, hard truth that DC kind of needs to cope with. Zack Snyder's Justice League is actually one of the better DC movies to ever get released from DC. And if we're all being honest with each other, that wasn't because they wanted it to happen. It was because they wanted people to finally shut up about the Snyder Cut. As a whole, I think Zack Snyder's Justice League does still hold up. It still has a lot of fun, action-packed moments. It still has a lot of lighthearted, likable moments as well. It basically achieved the impossible outcome that no one expected, which is actually being a pretty good movie. There's just a bit of a journey to get to the point where you feel rewarded and finally get the moments you want. There are also a few moments in this movie that you could change and it would make it a much better movie as a whole too. At the end of the day, I guess it just sucks that the epilogue of Zack Snyder's Justice League feels a bit pointless, considering we all know that DC will likely never continue this storyline, be it via an animated series or a comic book run. As a whole, it's a good thing that Zack Snyder's Justice League exists because we were clearly robbed of a flawed yet good movie that could have been a legitimately great movie. Wait a second. Did my team restore the Snyderverse?